Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today, we are strapping in for what is arguably the most dramatic, high-stakes corporate battle we have seen in the last decade.
Absolutely.
And it's a fight for the content that really defines our culture. The battle for Warner Brothers Discovery, or WBD, is absolutely back on.
And this isn't just some boring spreadsheet exercise. I mean, this is a real clash of titans.
It is. It pits a revitalized Paramount, backed by, well, one of the world's richest and most politically connected men, against the pure streaming giant, Netflix.
That's right. And this story it's really a collision of corporate finance on a scale we rarely witness. We're talking about media regulation that dates back decades and some really intense political maneuvering.
Yeah, we're looking at a deal that could top $78 billion.
$78 billion.
And it will determine the future of major movie studios like Warner Bros., the foundational fate of the movie theater experience worldwide, and maybe most critically for a lot of people, the ideological direction of a massive, globally significant news organization, CNN. So our mission today, it's a serious one, and it's based entirely on this exhaustive stack of sources you provided. We have documents detailing the renewed and, frankly, pretty hostile bid from Paramount.
And the staggering personal financial guarantees being offered by the Ellison family, it's unbelievable.
It really is. The sources also lay out the very clear political implications tied to the key players and the massive cultural risks associated with both possible outcomes, whether it's Paramount or Netflix.
So we need to unpack the granular financial facts.
Exactly. We need to figure out what the political maneuvering looks like from, D.C. down to Hollywood and understand precisely what this means for the next 5 years of content you consume and especially the fate of CNN.
And what stands out immediately is just the sheer intensity, the personalized nature of this hostile bid.
Yeah.
The fact that Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, is personally guaranteeing tens of billions of dollars, that alone should stop anyone in their tracks.
It's a huge number.
It is. And hostile bids of this magnitude, they aren't just launched because of a standard financial opportunity. They happen because of deep-seated, intensely personal motivation. It's usually about control or power or ideological positioning.
And in this case,
given that CNN is involved and you look at the political histories of the backers, it feels like we are witnessing a unique intersection of all three of those motives at the same time.
I agree. And that personal commitment is the initial shock factor we have to address right off the bat. The central conflict isn't just about which company wins the bid.
No.
It's the fact that Paramount, despite offering a significantly higher immediate per-share valuation, is being repeatedly rejected by the WBD board,
who seem to be favoring Netflix.
Right. And Larry Ellison's deep and very public involvement means this is no longer just a corporate skirmish between a couple of CEOs. It's a battle of wills. And it's backed by astronomical personal wealth and some pretty serious political ambition.
And if we really understand the level of personal capital being deployed here, we begin to understand how serious the situation is. This isn't just a merger, it's a statement.
Yeah.
And that brings us directly into the massive financials.
Okay, let's unpack this financial duel. We really need to focus on the scale of Paramount's renewed bid and this massive, unprecedented $40.4 billion guarantee.
The overall enterprise value of WBD, if Paramount's, is valued at a staggering $78 billion.
Let's put that in perspective for a second. This is a financial transaction so large, it genuinely reshapes the global media landscape overnight.
Oh, completely. It puts it in the same league as the biggest tech and media mergers in history. I mean, we're talking Disney-Fox level stuff.
And the crucial, really fascinating detail here lies in the structure of the financing, specifically the role played by Larry Ellison.
Exactly. We know WBD initially questioned the legitimacy of Paramount's funding. They called it illusionary, which we'll get into.
We will.
But the moment the dynamics really shifted was when Larry Ellison, founder of Oracle, and of course the father of Paramount CEO David Ellison,
from Skydance Media,
he personally stepped in. He personally guaranteed $40.4 billion of the total equity funding for this.
$40.4 billion. Personally guaranteed. I mean, we hear massive numbers all the time, but for the benefit of, our listener, let's explain what a personal guarantee of this size truly signifies in a hostile corporate takeover.
Well, it fundamentally changes the risk profile. See, a corporate guarantee is backed by the company's assets, its future performance.
Yep.
A personal guarantee, especially from an individual of Ellison's stature, means his personal fortune is explicitly on the line. It serves two main purposes.
Okay.
First, it just eliminates any doubt about Paramount's ability to cover the equity portion of the deal, which is critical because hostile bidders often struggle to lock in funding.
Right. That's often where these things fall apart.
It is. And second, it sends this unmistakable signal to the WBD board and to the shareholders that this deal will close regardless of market volatility or any short-term financing. It's a power move.
And let's contextualize that guarantee based on the source. Larry Ellison's net worth currently hovers around $250 billion.
A fortune that is largely derived from Oracle, which, we should be clear, isn't just a software company. It's a massive provider of cloud and data services to global governments and huge corporations.
That's essential context.
It is, because that $40.4 billion personal guarantee represents roughly 1/6 of his entire net worth.
1/6.
That is an enormous and very rare amount of personal wealth to put on the line for a corporate takeover. It really speaks volumes about the commitment behind the Paramount.
It elevates the motivation beyond a simple acquisition, doesn't it? It's something more. It's almost like legacy building or maybe a strategic ideological investment.
I think that's a perfect way to put it.
And crucially, that Paramount valuation is currently the higher immediate offer, which, theoretically should be very attractive to shareholders.
It should be.
Paramount has offered $30 per share for WBDD, and that deal is for all the WBD assets, the massive film library, all the HBO content, all the cable channels, and critically, CNN.
Right, which creates this financial paradox we're looking at. The higher bidder is being rejected. Which brings us to the competing Netflix offer and this perplexing WBD board preference.
So detail the Netflix offer for us. If they are the preferred buyer, what specific value are they putting on the table, and how does it compare directly to that $30 Paramount offer?
So Netflix has offered $27.75 per share for Warner Brothers Discovery.
$27.75.
And their deal is structured a little differently. It focuses primarily on acquiring the core WBD and HBO assets, which signals a deep strategic interest in that premium content library and the IP that Netflix can just immediately monetize on its platform.
So, okay, we have Paramount offering $30 and Netflix offering $27.75. That's a difference of $2.25 per share right now in cash.
Yep.
Why on earth has the WBD board rejected Paramount multiple times and repeatedly opted for Netflix? If the board's primary duty is fiduciary, to maximize immediate shareholder return, this looks like a clear breach of that.
And this is where the valuation argument gets incredibly nuanced, and it's the primary reason the board has avoided Paramount. The board is not just looking at the immediate per share price.
Okay, so what's their argument?
They argue that Netflix's proposed plan, which involves systematically spinning off the non-core cable assets.
So like all the remaining basic cable channels and some international stuff.
Exactly. They argue that this will ultimately increase the independent value of those spun-off stations.
I mean, how does spinning off those assets make the overall deal more valuable? That sounds counterintuitive.
It's a classic financial strategy. The WBD board claims that by separating the often debt-laden, lower-growth cable assets from the premium, high-growth studio and HBO core, it will allow the remaining core entity to trade at a much higher multiple, a cleaner multiple, unburdened by legacy.
Okay, I see.
And what's more, the spun-off cable entities, while smaller, would also likely be acquired or merge with other companies, realizing their own independent value.
So the WBD board is claiming that the total resulting valuation for shareholders, so the Netflix cash and stock, plus the value of these new independent spun-off assets, would ultimately be higher than the single integrated $30 per share deal from Paramount.
That's the bet. It is a calculated bet on the long-term value of a strategic breakup versus the immediate value of a fully funded integrated sale.
That is an extremely complex argument to sell to an average shareholder who's currently looking at an immediate $2.25 per share difference.
And a guaranteed $40 billion in financing from a verifiable billionaire.
Exactly. And Paramount seems to be aware of this tension because they upped the stakes on the insurance policy to counter the board's maneuvering.
They absolutely did. A critical element of any merger agreement is the breakup, which acts as insurance for the target company's shareholders if the deal collapses.
Right.
So to show parity and undeniable commitment, Paramount recently upped its breakup fee to a massive $5.8 billion.
Oh.
And that move exactly matches the payment Netflix had promised W shareholders if regulatory issues or shareholder objections derail their merger.
So they're ensuring that even if the deal fails, WBD shareholders are financially protected to the exact same degree offered by the Netflix proposal.
Precisely. They're closing one crucial avenue of attack against.
And this is where the financial details start to intersect with the geopolitical and cultural stake.
Right.
Let's talk about the specific, controversial financial backers supporting supporting the Paramount bid, because this is not just the Ellison family's money.
No, it is a complex tapestry of global capital. While Larry Ellison's personal guarantee covers the equity funding required for the deal, the overall Paramount offer is financed in large part by sovereign wealth funds.
Which ones?
Specifically, those tied directly to the royal families of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi.
Which just introduces a whole other layer of political, regulatory, and cultural scrutiny that Netflix, being a U.S.-based publicly traded company, doesn't really face to the same extent.
Not at all.
This isn't just private equity. This is foreign state influence entering American media ownership.
Precisely. And it's worth taking a historical beat here, as the sources mentioned. WBD is a company that has been passed around a lot.
Yeah, nobody seems to want to keep it.
Right. It's been part of Time Warner, then AOL Time Warner, then AT&T, then Discovery. Nobody keeps it for very long.
Which suggests the current ownership structure is just highly volatile and unstable.
I think so.
Yeah.
And that may explain why the board is desperate for what they perceive as the stability and long-term vision of, even if it requires this complicated financial restructuring and a lower immediate price.
That history of volatility, combined with the source of the back from these foreign sovereign wealth funds, led directly to the WBD board launching a very specific, and I mean quite aggressive, critique of Paramount's finance, which we have to dissect now.
The initial resistance was rooted in severe public skepticism. It was really aimed at undermining the bid's credibility. The WBD board publicly questioned the legitimacy of Paramount's finance, and they used incredibly strong.
They called the funding illusionary.
And they went further, claiming that Paramount had actively misrepresented itself to WBD shareholders about the guaranteed commitment.
That is a direct public shot at the seriousness and stability of the bid. It feels designed specifically to inject doubt among those fiduciary shareholders.
It was. And this must have been deeply irritated David Ellison, the Paramount CEO, especially since his backers include some of the richest and most powerful people in the world.
Well, the sources note that he publicly responded, calling the board's action absurd.
I mean, it creates this fascinating public relations and legal dynamic. You have one side of the negotiation essentially accusing the other of fabricating a $78 billion deal.
Yeah.
And because that accusation touched on the legal requirement for bidder to prove they have sufficient and reliable capital, it necessitated an immediate and highly transparent response from the Ellison family to re-legitimize the bid.
And to demonstrate irrefutable financial muscle.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's unpack this transparency. The WBD board was using the legal mechanism of fiduciary duty to cast doubt. What specific extraordinary steps did Larry Ellison take to counteract this illusionary financing critique? They really had to lay their most sensitive personal finances bare just to prove they are serious.
The response was multi-pronged and deeply unusual for a corporate merger. First, Larry Ellison agreed not to
And for our listener, family trusts are often these complex private legal vehicles used to manage massive generational wealth.
Correct. And the WBD board had explicitly raised this as a concern. They suggested that Ellison might revoke or restructure the trust, which could complicate or withdraw the billions in finance deal.
So this public commitment not to revoke was a binding commitment ensuring that the capital stream remained secure and accessible.
It was. And they went further, providing evidence of wealth that is usually kept strictly private.
Like what?
Well, as irrefutable evidence of wealth and commitment, Paramount is publishing records to confirm that the trust owns 1.16 billion Oracle shares.
1.16 billion shares.
We are talking about hundreds of billions of dollars worth of easily verifiable assets. This was a direct, surgical, and very public response to the board's claim that the assets were somehow in debt.
This level of financial disclosure in the middle of a hostile bid is extremely rare.
It is. It speaks volumes about the Ellisons' determination. They are essentially saying, you questioned our assets and our legal commitment. Here is the public verifiable proof, and it's more than enough to cover the acquisition multiple.
So if the WBDB board can't legitimately question the funding anymore, the battle moves away from finance and directly into the realm of culture, content, and ideology.
Exactly. The question shifts from can they afford W to what will they do with W? And that leads us to the fundamental philosophical divide.
Beyond the financing, the real cultural tension lies in what this acquisition means for the content itself. This isn't just about who signs the checks. It's about two fundamentally different futures for Hollywood.
Yeah, and they're divided by the question of preserving the theatrical release model versus pure dominant stream.
This is perhaps the most significant choice facing industry insiders, creators, and every single person who consumes media.
We are looking at two extremely divergent paths for the film industry, and they affect everything from job security and artistic freedom to the ideological slant of our mass.
Let's start with Paramount's path. We know the Ellisons are controversial politically, but they seem to be the preferred choice for the health of the traditional film industry ecosystem. Why is that?
That is the core irony highlighted by the sources. Hollywood, which, often leans progressive, absolutely hates the Ellisons' conservative politics.
Right.
But industry observers and unions are rooting for Paramount because it is seen as the best bet to ensure movies continue to be released theatrically with robust marketing and wide distribution.
So Paramount's business model, which incorporates the theater experience as a fundamental part of its revenues, that's seen as a critical safeguard.
It is. It preserves a wide array of high-paying, specialized jobs across production, distribution,
And we're not just talking about actors and directors here. We are talking about the massive ecosystem that relies on that traditional structure.
Precisely. We're talking about sound mixers, visual effects artists, lighting grip, set designers, location scouts, thousands of unionized workers whose jobs depend on the volume and scale of production that the theatrical model.
So if Paramount wins, the expectation is they will preserve more traditional release windows, and that keeps that whole machine humming.
That's the hope.
So, okay, if Paramount wins, the structure of film release is maintained, stabilizing a huge job. What about the counter scenario if Netflix prevails?
The fear among traditional filmmakers is palpable. If Netflix acquires WBD, the prevailing industry concern is that they will treat the extensive WBD catalog, including hugely valuable IPs like Batman and Harry Potter.
They'll just treat it as just more content for our streaming service.
Exactly, often at the expense of traditional theatrical releases. There's widespread industry cynicism that Netflix will break any promises made about respecting release windows, accelerating the erosion of the theatrical experience.
And that would lead to
a significant acceleration in job loss. Streaming production often favors faster, more consolidated, and cheaper production metrics compared to prestige theatrical release.
Now we have to address the major political and cultural caveat tied directly to the Paramount bid. Because of the Ellison family's deeply conservative politics, specifically their close relationship and friendship with Donald Trump, and the significant investment from the Gulf state, the source material speculates that films produced under a Paramount-owned WBD would likely undergo an ideological shift,
becoming more right-leaning.
Yes.
And that political implication is unavoidable. It's one that must be reported impartially based on the source analysis. The financing from the Gulf states in particular raises immediate, tangible questions about censorship and content control,
which are tied to the cultural norms and legal systems of those specific sovereign wealth funds.
Right.
So what exactly is the specific targeted cultural concern here?
It centers on representation, and it specifically targets diversity. The source material argues that the influence of the Saudi, Qatari, and Abu Dhabi investment means there will likely be less LGBTQ+ representation in,
and potentially a broader reduction in diverse or politically challenging content.
Yes. The sources even used a very specific niche cultural benchmark to illustrate the loss of Tumblr fanfics from cartoon.
Okay, let's unpack that specific phrase for the listener, because it sounds niche, but it's really shorthand for a huge cultural movement.
It is. Tumblr fanfics from Cartoon Network is a cultural shorthand referring to the type of modern, diverse, youth-driven content that has flourished under WBD's HBO Max and Cartoon Network umbrella.
So we're talking about specific animated series that are known for strong queer representation and progressive narrative.
Exactly. This content is hugely popular with Gen Z and millennial audiences, but it is precisely the type of content celebrating specific LGBTQ+ theme that the Gulf state invests, operating under their own cultural and legal norms, frequently censor or prohibit in their home market.
So the fear is that their investment will exert a kind of chilling effect on the creation of this type of diverse intellectual property globally.
That's absurd.
That is a stark philosophical choice you're presenting to the consumer and to Hollywood.
It is.
On one hand, potentially saving the theatrical experience and thousands of union jobs, but on the other, facing a likely ideological shift in the content and a clear reduction in diverse representation driven by the source of the capital.
It truly highlights the idea of a no-good scenario for modern-day Hollywood, as one would put it. They are essentially forced to choose between preserving the form and the ecosystem, theatrical releases and job, but potentially sacrificing certain content liberty, or fully embracing the new streaming economy with Netflix, but accelerating job losses and accepting the death of traditional film distribution.
And the content itself, what you watch, is the political football.
It's right in the middle.
Let's pivot now to the political centerpiece of this entire CNN. The sources are very clear that if Paramount acquires WBD, CNN's future would be dramatically, irrevocably altered. The analysis suggests Larry Ellison is interested in CNN specifically because of its profound political implications and its influence.
The interest in CNN appears to be highly strategic, ideological, and deeply personal for the Ellison family. The speculation is that Paramount would not permit CNN to continue operating in its current form or with its current editorial direction.
So what's the potential outcome?
One suggested by the sources is that Paramount might run CNN similarly to how they currently manage CBS News. Or they might attempt to strategically merge the two organizations completely to maximize operational efficiencies and editorial alignment.
And if they merge CNN and CBS News, that immediately raises monumental regulatory red flags.
Oh, huge flags. We'll get.
But the most immediate and controversial figure associated with the future direction of news under a Paramount banner is Barry Weiss.
Barry Weiss is currently the editor-in-chief of CBS News, an entity under the Paramount umbrella. Her role has become a lightning rod for this entire conversation around journalistic integrity, editorial independence, and political influence within.
And that's because she represents a specific, highly controversial editorial philosophy.
She does.
Detail her rise for us, because the way she was acquired by Paramount is a fascinating corporate transaction story in itself. It wasn't just a talent acquisition.
No, it wasn't. Paramount bought her popular Substack blog, and the price tag was shocking, reportedly $150 million.
$150 million.
And they made this substantial acquisition with the explicit goal of putting her in charge of CBS News' editorial. This wasn't just buying content, it was buying a brand.
A brand defined by its public critiques of established mainstream.
That's right. She was previously an opinion editor at the New York Times and had a highly publicized self-imposed departure after publicly complaining about what she termed the uncomfortable ideological climate and censorship within that.
$150 million for a newsletter. That's not a content purchase. That sounds like a valuation placed on political influence and disruption.
I think that's exactly right.
So what does that specific price tag reveal about the goal behind bringing her into the Paramount ecosystem?
It reveals that Paramount, under the Ellison influence, wasn't just acquiring a journalist. They were acquiring an editorial philosophy designed to challenge the existing media consensus. The price tag indicates that the value wasn't in the subscriber base, but in the political left and the ability to reposition a major news brand, CBS News, away from the established ideological center of the Democratic Party. She is a known quantity.
So her appointment ensures that Paramount's news division will be disruptive and aligned with the counter-narrative favored by its key back.
That's the strategy.
And what is her political identity? Because she's causing controversy even before the CNN merger is a reality.
Well, she consistently characterizes herself as a liberal or a centrist who is fundamentally dedicated to intellectual freedom and viewpoint diversity. But the political reality is that she is viewed as a conservative figure, or at least a powerful opponent of the woke left by the very far left.
Her critique of the established media status quo has placed her squarely in the middle of the culture war.
It has, leading to intense internal scrutiny. She's already making waves, facing massive criticism, and even potential walkouts from her peers at CBS News.
After what? I heard something about 60 Minutes.
Yeah, after, for example, cutting a sensitive investigative story at 60 Minutes that she considered insufficiently sourced or just too dicey politically.
This feeds directly into the larger journalistic integrity debate surrounding her tenure. That Nation article we referenced offered some blistering criticism of her qualifications.
That piece really laid into her, pulling no punch. It claims she is stupendously unqualified for the role of editor-in-chief and fundamentally ideologically opposed to the practice of good journalism as it's defined by mainstream liberals.
So this isn't just professional criticism over one story.
No, it's a fundamental challenge to her core capacity to lead a national news organization and enforce established standards.
And the criticism goes deeper, though. It relates to the intersection of money, power, and media. There is a specific, very blunt water carrier being leveled against her role.
That critique alleges that Vice is merely another in a long line of feckless water carriers for the 1%.
And what does that mean exactly?
The argument, as presented in the source, is that her role is to essentially run interference for the interests of the wealthy elite, specifically the Ellisons and the Gulf State funders, making them feel like their near pathological selfishness, their hoarding of money and power, and their total disregard for the public is somehow morally justifiable.
Wow.
It positions her appointment not as a move toward journalistic balance, but as a political and ideological appointment designed to soothe the conscience and advance the interests of the economic elite who increasingly own and control our national media.
Wait, okay, if the source material suggests this level of fundamental journalistic opposition, isn't that proof that the critique is politically motivated rather than based purely on merit?
That's a crucial point for our listener to understand, and we have to frame this as conflicting narratives reported material.
Right.
While the Nation critique focuses on her alleged lack of qualification and her political role, the source material also offers a powerful counter-narrative explaining why these established journalists might be so angry.
And what does that counter-narrative suggest?
It suggests that the underlying conflict is that established, primarily liberal journalists are angry because they perceive that the media status quo of the last 10 to 15 years, where they held significant editorial influence, is changing dramatically.
So the argument is that they feel they are no longer in charge.
Exactly. That the narratives, the editorial practices, and the cultural norms they established are being directly and powerfully challenged by figures like Weiss, leading to this massive, often personalized backlash to her. It's a turf war driven by ideological realignment.
It's the battle for the soul of the newsroom, framed by competing billionaires and their chosen disruptors.
That's it.
And if Paramount wins this WBD acquisition, it is highly speculated that Weiss would be put in charge of CNN too, or that the organizations would be merged.
And can you imagine the internal battle if a traditional newsroom like CNN suddenly falls under the editorial control of a figure who views their established journalism as fundamentally flawed?
It would be an immediate and catastrophic clash of cultures and ideologies,
resulting in much screeching and many resignations, as whether you agree with her critique of the media or the critique leveled against her, her potential elevation to control both CBS News and CNN represents a fundamental paradigm-shifting change.
driven entirely by the Ellison's acquisition effort and their intent to use media for broader political influence.
Precisely.
Beyond the boardroom and the newsroom, we have these external forces that could completely determine the outcome of this multi-billion-dollar fight.
Right. Political interference and the massive regulatory hurdles required to combine the giant.
And this deal is happening in an incredibly high-stakes political environment, and the players involved are arguably the best connected figures in American business. So let's start with the Trump factor. The source material highlights a direct link that you just can't ignore. Larry Ellison is openly described as besties with Trump.
And that relationship immediately politicizes the entire merger discussion, regardless of the financial merits.
And that friendship has tangible, speculated consequences for the regulatory fate of the deal, doesn't it?
It does. The sources suggest that Trump is reportedly, quote, giddy at the prospect of CNN getting shut down or sold off, seeing the political neutralization of a longtime opponent network as a potential huge political win for him.
And this delight is hypothesized to translate into direct action through political and regulatory,
leveraging the power of the executive.
So the speculation is that Trump would actively try to influence the outcome of the deal, even from the outside.
Yes. The sources suggest he would try to put the keybows on the Netflix-Warner Brothers merger. This interference would involve leveraging political influence to slow down the regulatory review process at the Department of Justice or the FTC. He could stall the deal out for years, months, through complex regulatory challenges, even if he doesn't have direct stop it.
And simultaneously,
he would allegedly attempt to use the same leverage to expedite the Paramount, ensuring a swift review. The expectation is that the entire deal is destined to wind up in court, with phone calls made and threats made behind the scenes to influence the appointed regulatory body.
That moves us into the actual legitimate regulatory hurdles for media conglomerates, regardless of who is in the White House.
Right.
Because even if the Ellisons get their preferred deal approved, they face a massive legal challenge if they try to combine the assets of CNN and CBS News.
This is perhaps the largest, most structural issue facing the Paramount. Merging CNN, a WBD asset, and CBS News, Paramount asset, could directly violate existing antitrust and FCC regulations regarding the undue concentration of...
And regulators are primarily concerned with ensuring competition in the market and, crucially for news, maintaining diversity of voice and opinion.
That's the core of it.
Which specific regulatory concerns apply here? Let's get technical.
So the primary concern revolves around broadcast ownership rules and horizontal merger guidelines enforced by the FCC and the DOJ. Owning two major national-level broadcast news organizations, which is effectively what CNN and CBS News are, could be deemed anti-competitive.
And the regulatory bodies would assess market power.
Correct. If one entity controls too large a share of national news viewership, editorial influence, or advertising revenue, it crosses a threshold where the merger is considered harmful to the public.
And here's where it gets really interesting. We have a strong historical precedent for this. We've seen this play out before with major news assets.
We have a perfect comparison point. This regulatory concern is directly comparable to the massive Disney-Fox asset act several years ago.
Right.
In that transaction, Fox News, a highly valuable and politically powerful asset, had to be specifically spun off from the other Fox Entertainment and studio assets before the Disney merger could be completed.
And Rupert Murdoch and his family retained ownership of the news network, entirely separate from the entity Disney acquired. So the precedent established there is that if you want to acquire the entertainment assets of a major company, you may have to leave the national news division behind.
It demonstrates that the separation of major competing national news organizations is a core, non-negotiable regulatory concern that Paramount will have. They cannot simply assume they can merge two competing national news brands, CNN and CBS.
They would likely be forced to divest one of them.
Which fundamentally changes the ideological rationale for acquiring W in the first place, or drastically reduces the value of their proposed deal.
And finally, let's consider the internal wildcard. Shareholder power versus the board's recommendation. Paramount is running a hostile takeover, which is a legal maneuver specifically designed to bypass management.
That's right. The hostile nature of Paramount's offer means they are conducting what is essentially a tender offer designed to bypass the resistant W board.
So the board favors Netflix.
But the shareholders are the ultimate owner. This means that WBD shareholders could ultimately reject the board's recommendation, which, as we noted, favors the lower-priced Netflix option.
What's the mechanism for that rejection?
Well, if enough shareholders prioritize the immediate, guaranteed, and higher $30 per share payout from Paramount over the board's complex long-term valuation strategy.
The one associated with the Netflix spin-off plan.
Right. They can simply tender their shares to Paramount. If Paramount secures the majority of the shares this way, they approve the deal, effectively overriding the current management's preference.
And that proves the hostility of the takeover attempt was successful.
And it adds another critical layer of unpredictability to the whole process, because that immediate financial incentive is powerful.
This entire deep dive reveals two incredibly stark choices facing WBD shareholders, Hollywood creatives, news organizations, and frankly, the American public.
It really does.
So let's synthesize these two paths one last time and think about what this truly means for the culture.
Okay, so Path A is the Paramount-Ellison route. It promises the preservation of traditional theatrical releases and jobs, a massive financial guarantee, and a higher immediate per share. But it comes with very clear political and cultural strings attached: the influence of Gulf states' sovereign wealth, the expected rightward shift in content, and a dramatic, controversial overhaul potentially under Barry.
Path B is the Netflix. It offers streaming dominance. It's currently the preferred option of the W board based on that complex, long-term valuation.
And likely ensures a continuation of certain diverse content, though under the pure commercial pressure.
But it carries the heavy risks of potentially accelerating job losses across Hollywood, the likely death of the traditional film release window, and a lower immediate per-share valuation for shareholders who may feel shortchanged by the.
And regardless of which specific billionaire political faction or sovereign wealth fund ultimately owns the company, the source material points out a crucial, often forgotten lesson. Major media companies have always been bankrolled by the super rich. Ted Turner funded CNN. William Randolph Hearst built his empire with massive personal capital. The fight for control of the narratives we consume is always, at its root, a battle among the economic elite to shape the means of cultural production.
So what does this all mean for you, the person watching this battle unfold and consuming the content produced by this massive organization?
The key lesson here might not be which company ultimately wins the vote or the bid, but the sheer power dynamic that's revealed when journalistic organizations and cultural output become bargaining chips in a multi-billion-dollar financial and political battle. It forces us to confront the reality that the two options presented both carry significant, unavoidable ideological consequences for the content that shapes and defines our culture. You are watching a battle where the outcome is not just financial, but deeply philosophical about who gets to tell the stories that define the world we live in.
The winner dictates the cultural agenda for the next decade.
That's what's at stake.